happy to start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, we can get started, Cindy. Yeah, we can get started. Okay.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? Hope everyone is doing well. I'm just getting up, but I guess it's the end of your very busy week, probably. So how much time do we have?
So an hour, or it's up to you.
Okay. I have a lot of various slides from different presentations that I compiled, and we'll get through as much as we can and then give you some time to ask me questions. If you feel like asking any questions while I'm talking, just jump in and ask as I'm going over that topic. But I'm happy to be with this group, this class, with a new group for a second time. Very nice to be able to make this connection globally to talk about some of the things that have been important to me in my teaching and research. I have been at Texas State for 15 years now. Texas State University is in San Marcos, Texas, which is just south of Austin, just 30 miles south. And I actually live in Austin. I'm in my house in Austin right now. And you've probably heard of Austin, Texas. And before that, I got my PhD at the University of Texas, which is in Austin. So I've been in Austin a very, very long time. And before I did my PhD, I actually worked in the tech industry. I worked for NCR Corporation and Compaq Computer, which is now part of Hewlett Packard. And through that time period, I became interested in the internet, mid 90s. It wasn't like I was working on it for my job, but people at work were showing me some HTML, and basically that was the beginning of it. It started out as kind of a hobby. And from there, I just really became fascinated in the ways that communication was going to change based on digital technologies. I had no idea how it was going to change in the mid 90s. I just had an inkling that it might be kind of important. And I'd always had a real passion for communication. So this was something that allowed me to start garnering an audience. I created a website about bands that I would see, music that I would go to, and I still am very much into live music. And it was just kind of like a fun passion project. And then when I made the decision to leave my corporate job and get a PhD, this was the right direction to go. This was like, well, let's study communication from a journalism standpoint, and or study technology from a journalism standpoint. And so, did my PhD at University of Texas, and then was able to get, I left for 1 year and then was able to get a job back in Texas at Texas State University. And since that time, I've been teaching classes like web design, some more advanced coding, some more digital issues. And in the presentation, I've got some slides about our new degree that we started 5 years ago. I can't believe it's been 5 years. That time went very quickly, but the degree is called Digital Media Innovation. And I'll talk about the kind of jobs that students get out of that curriculum. Let me go ahead and share my screen if this will let me. Yeah, here we go. And then I've got a presentation here. I'm kind of hide this stuff. Everybody see my presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. Let's go back here. So I want to, talk a little bit about product management and journalism, but you have to kind of preface this with where we are in terms of digital media in the world. Video used to mean one thing. Video used to mean, we watched something on a movie screen or we watched it on a TV. And now video can mean so many things. It can be part of a multimedia package on a website. It can be part of, it's a very important part of social media in terms of things we see posted on Instagram and Twitter and even TikTok now. How popular is TikTok in India?
Well, it's banned in India now. It's banned. So we are using Reels. Reels is very, increasingly becoming very popular, which is a Instagram version of TikTok.
Okay, yeah, and so Instagram started doing Reels, so that they would be very similar to having these short videos that would allow people to create them themselves. Is there an echo? I think we're fine. Okay, so anyway, so video means a whole different thing now. And coding and programming really mean different things. Programming used to be the programs that you scheduled for your channel. And as an academic, coding used to be the things that we did with content analyses when we were doing our research. But now we look at different skills that we need in coding and programming to make to work in content management systems, to present our information on the web, to create data visualizations, and to make things interactive. And so our concept of that has changed. And then even our concept of a journalist has changed, where it used to be, this person that was at the typewriter or somebody standing in front of a large television camera. Now everybody has their smartphones, so anybody can really publish something and interview somebody. Data journalists do work with code and create these visualizations. And what we're going to talk about a lot today is product management. Media companies, really their main mission now is to develop digital products that the journalism can sit on. Also digital products that help solve problems for the audience. And so having the skill set to create and manage these products is a new and different kind of a skill set in journalism that we'll be talking about. And I will provide a copy of this presentation so you can look at this in more detail. But a few years ago, I started just putting together a list of words that had to do with digital, because I was finding that students and even some faculty were just not familiar with the lexicon of digital, the kind of words that signified the digital environment. Everything from engagement and sharing and personal brand, which is part of social, responsive design, which is part of mobile, lots of things about data, making it interactive or using analytics. And I found that we couldn't really be successful in this environment if we didn't have the words of the environment. And it very quickly became 60 or 70 terms that I put under all these different categories. So the world has changed. The world of media has changed, and that has happened because of digital technologies being introduced. I have often said that media companies are tech companies. They're just a special kind of tech company. They have a special mission within the tech environment. And it's kind of like how Apple and Google and Facebook are all tech companies, but they all do very different things. And so a journalism organization or a media company is just another kind of a tech company. Many of them just don't know that yet. So that's where we are. So my very first research project that I did in this area, and at the time I also wrote a Nieman Lab article where I said product management is the new journalism. This was 6 years ago, I think I published that. And one of the people that I interviewed for that had this quote: "We used to know what a media product was. It was a newspaper or a television broadcast. Now it's much broader." So that complicates the environment when you have websites, and you even have to manage your content management system differently. You have applications for special projects on mobile. Obviously, many media companies are using TikTok to attract a younger audience. And some stories are actually even handled as products. When you look at some of the work of ProPublica or Texas Tribune, where they use a lot of data and a team has to be put together to present this information, we're talking about skills beyond just reporting and editing. Those are still very important skills to have, obviously, in a media environment, but it's much broader, the kind of things that people need to know how to do to manage a digital product. A lot of collaboration, a lot of leadership, and we'll talk about some of those skills that are involved with that. And then here's just a few more examples, and these are all places that I have had students work. I have one student who's she's a webmaster for the city of San Antonio. I have another former student who works for the grocery store, H-E-B, and he's a product manager for their digital, for their mobile app that helps people order their groceries and do curbside, which became very, very important during the pandemic. And then I have students who, one is the Chief Innovation Officer for Texas Restaurant Association, and then students who have worked for this local company, Koros, in Austin. That's an analytics company. So we've been pretty successful moving students into new types of roles. And I think it's pretty important to think about what some of the other career opportunities that students can have if they don't go into journalism, but if they have a journalism related degree. And we've had a lot of success with that. So here are the link. Here's the pictures of the two articles. One, product management is the new journalism, and managing digital products in a newsroom context, where I talked about just the early introduction to some of the first people who were in product management roles. They were defining their jobs as managing products, or even if they didn't define it as such, maybe they had titles that were more editorial, they still were managing digital products. And one thing I like to say is because we have all these different products now in media organizations, these products aren't going to manage themselves. Somebody is managing them. They may be doing it poorly. They may be doing it, as part of what they do, and it may not be part of their title. But as they become more prominent in the organization, somebody has to manage these products. Somebody has to manage all the resources that go into them. And somebody has to understand what their mission and value should be and whether they're achieving that. So they need to be able to look at some key results or analytics to be able to determine, how to modify them in the future or delete them. So again, very important to the future sustainability of media and to the mission of a media organization. So if you looked at some of the things that I sent, and if you've read any articles about product management, then you maybe have seen this graph that has the intersection of business, tech, and the user. And that's really the role of a product manager, is to kind of operate in those spaces, understand the needs of the user, understand the business needs of the organization, and then apply technology to solving those problems. And so, there are different ways for media companies to distribute information, different ways for them to engage the public. So this includes social media. And then, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, different ways to assess the results and the outcomes. And these products really also need to, this is very important, they need to reflect an organization's commitment to ethics and its responsibility to the audience. And I think with a lot of the information coming out about Facebook, that they may not be reflecting the ethics that at least its audience would like to have it uphold. I think it's very important to hold media organizations and other technology companies to our sense of ethics if they're going to have so much power and influence in how they disseminate information. So I think we can't forget ethics in this whole equation about becoming a tech company. And so there's some product concepts that you may have heard of, some different processes that operate in different media organizations. As I mentioned, the whole purpose of developing a media product is to address some sort of a user need. And so these are sometimes called different things. You may hear it referred to as user research or human-centered design or design thinking. And they all are kind of the same thing, where there are these phases where you start by understanding the needs of the audience, by empathizing with them, then defining the problem, really defining what it is and not assuming that you know what the problem is, going through a lot of ideation, brainstorming, coming up with different ideas for the solution and prototyping those different ideas and then getting them tested. And then you do that over again. Share it with people to get their feedback, and then you tweak it, as opposed to just one time going through this process. It's usually more of a circular process. And then, there's some other product concepts that I introduce in my classes. And again, this goes toward the idea that there are very different methodologies, very different terminology that we need to be introducing in journalism programs for students to be able to come out and operate in an environment like this. They need to understand what agile development means. It's short iterations, as I just mentioned, going through that process time and time again and assessing and adjusting every time you go through it, rather than thinking you would go through what they call a waterfall method, where you just go through it once, maybe spend thousands or millions of dollars and take a lot of time and realize at the end that you made a mistake or that it's not solving anybody's needs. Often, user experience design is a popular topic these days, as well as a position that a lot of our students would like to move into. And that really, it's the same thing, where you're looking at solving a problem for a user, but it's very focused on creating experiences for them that do that. And so that might be, creating the experiences that happen in an app, but it could also be something in real time, just thinking about what the process is that a user would have to go through. For instance, just the process of signing up for a subscription to a media website. Is it frictionless? How many steps do they have to take? How easy is it for them to pay? And if at any point that becomes hard, do people drop out and say, well, forget it, I'm not going to subscribe because it's too hard? Some of you may have had that experience with things that you went down that path, like I really want this, and then the experience was too hard. Prototyping, obviously, is another important concept. Being able to create something, whether it's a sketch with pencil and paper, or something that you do in a more sophisticated software program, but it's not the full application, but you create something that you can get into the hands of users, get them using it, and having them give you some feedback. And then you evaluate that. And so here's some of the new skills and competencies. Communication. So this is a perfect place in a School of Journalism and Mass Communication, in a journalism or media curriculum. It's a perfect place for these skills to be taught, because this, communication is the core of what we do. And almost every product manager that I have ever talked to said the most important thing that they know is communication, more than all their technology expertise. And then along with communication has to do with empathy, being able to talk to people, understand their problems, and not just solve the problems from your own perspective, but be able to understand other people's problems. And this is certainly an issue in diverse environments where you might think the problem is one thing, but when you get into the discussion with the actual target market, you're going to find out maybe some things that are different that would affect the outcome or the solution that you craft. You still have to be tech savvy. It's really more of an appreciation of technology culture. There's some discrepancy about whether or not somebody who works in product should code. I think if you're going to be a web developer or a user experience designer, yes, obviously that's part of the job. And some of those people have that job as sort of a gateway position to moving into product management, which then gives the product manager that insight and that experience. And so I think sometimes people take for granted how much they know of technology, and then they discount it because they're not actively using it every day as product managers. But I don't think you can decouple the idea of understanding tech very, very well and working with technology products and resources that support technology products, like other engineers, web developers, people like that. Strategy and leadership obviously is very important. Having a focus on solving problems and solving problems in multiple ways. Being able to work with cross-functional teams is also a product concept. And then finally, the product manager is usually the one who connects the product to the organization's mission. They may be working with the C-suite executives or the top editor of the organization to make sure that whatever product they make makes sense. For example, the New York Times cooking app, they're not recreating the Food Network. They're doing a New York Times version of the cooking app because the New York Times has always been a lot about culture. They've had recipes before. And so they felt like they had a certain approach or a certain way to develop a mobile application that had to do with cooking that would be a unique entrant in that environment. So does anybody have any questions right at this moment? Feel free to jump in if you think of anything as I'm talking about this.
Anybody? Yeah.
I'll continue. And if anybody has a question, just sort of jump in or just yell at me and I'll stop.
Raise your hand. Yeah.
Now, I can't see everybody. So if there is a hand raised, Dev, if you will, just wave me down.
Okay, Cindy, continue.
So I wrote this piece with a group of other scholars for Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly on product management and journalism and academia. And it was an invited forum. This is a new format that they're using, which I really like because it allows scholars to address an emerging topic in a way that is more descriptive and more inquiry oriented than doing traditional research. It sort of sets the stage before people do more traditional research in terms of doing a content analysis or doing traditional interviews or surveys or something like that. It's like really meant to tease out what's unique or different. And get this. And so there's a lot in it. There's a whole bunch of people who contributed to it, like 6 different areas that talk about different things about product management. But one of the, I think, important concepts that was teased out in this article was the concept of either journalism in product or journalism as product. Because sometimes when I do these presentations and I talk to students or professionals and use the word product, they don't like calling journalism a product. They feel like journalism is a service. They feel like product has a commodity connotation. So when I say, well, the journalism has to exist on something. So that's the journalism in product. It is sitting in a mobile application or sitting on a website or in a newspaper or on a broadcast or in any, it could be a VR or AR application that it's sitting in, but the journalism has to sit inside of some sort of a product. And again, those products don't manage themselves. So somebody has to be developing and thinking about the places in which the journalism exists. Then there's this concept of journalism as product, and it's not meant to commoditize journalism or reduce it in any way. It's meant to connote that you would use product concepts like understanding user needs as you create any journalism product. And I think that's also a very important skill for people to understand is, as you are creating a story, as you are working on different aspects of a media organization, who is your audience? Who are the users and what are their needs? And really go through that process as opposed to just assuming, because we've done this so many times before, and then going through a process and assessing results. So often a very lengthy process of maybe elections or other types of lengthy enterprise coverage never gets really assessed in a way to understand if it met the needs of the audience. And so that's what journalism as product means. And so a little bit more than a year ago, a group began called the News Product Alliance. And my friend Becca Aronson, who used to work for the Texas Tribune, and she gave herself the product manager title while she was there. And then she became a product director for Chalkbeat, which covers an education beat in New York City. They actually globally cover education, but they're based in New York City. But anyway, Becca decided to start a nonprofit group called the News Product Alliance, and it became wildly successful. I mean, very quickly, we found that there were just hundreds of people who were working sort of in product capacities at different organizations, but many of them did not have support or career development. They felt like the people in the organization didn't understand what they did. They felt that they all had sort of different ways in which they yielded power in their organizations. And I talked with Becca at the early stages of this group, and she said that they were about to launch the group and they were going to do a survey when they invited people to join their newsletter. And I jumped on that opportunity. I was like, well, can I do the survey and can I help with it and get access to the results? And so that's what that latest project is. The article that I sent you recently got published, the one called From Boundary to Bridge and Beyond, the Path to Professionalization of Product Roles in Journalism. It started out as the report that you see in the top left, the state of the news product community, because I did this last year, but almost a year ago. It was last September. In October, I tabulated the results and put it in this report and just published it on our Media Innovation Lab's website. And now it is a year later, and Journalism Studies has published a different format of the report. Obviously, an academic journal has a different format of the results to be presented, and with a literature review, and the data is presented in a different way. But it's interesting to see that it took a whole year. to get the information out there. So I think this in and of itself kind of shows some of the opportunity that we have with the digital environment to be able to publish things in certain different time frames. So anyway, this, getting it out in a legit journal gets more people talking about it, gets more people thinking that this is really something that they need to be focused on. And I hope to see more research in the future on this. So we got 300 responses, about 297 responses. They were about 50-50 female and male. There were more females in the younger groups and more males in the older groups in terms of the sample. And we had about 70% white Caucasian respondents, and 30% of the sample was from various diverse groups, each representing less than 10% of the sample. Just to give you an idea of the kind of people who replied to this. It was a global survey, 32 countries, people from 32 countries replied, and 54% were from the US, but almost half was from other places. There were German contributors from 10.4%, and almost 8% of respondents were from Brazil. And so I won't go into a lot about literature, but there were two areas of literature prior to this that looked at jobs in journalism that were not journalist jobs and identified them as boundary roles, those internal and external to an organization that are not considered central to the production of news. And some of those things have to do with external companies like Facebook or Google or other ways, Twitter, other ways that people get news and information, but not central to the organization. But they started defining these internal roles of technology as boundary roles. And I was like, wow, that really seems to be an unfair framing when these are people in your own organization that are trying to support the journalism. They're not just the people running the computers or the tech people who go around and fix things, making sure the network runs. These are people that are actually developing these products that the journalism sits on. And some of the research actually used the term interloper, or for internal people that were in these roles, they called them intralopers. And so all the framing really just put these roles in the periphery or on the sidelines. And part of my interest in moving in this direction is helping media organizations and scholars and professionals all understand that these roles need to be moving more to the center of a media organization. Again, if they want to be successful and sustainable in the future, to give respect to these roles and give them more power and influence in the organization is going to be key. And so the literature around boundary roles and interlopers it was just kind of concerning to me. So I'll quickly go through some of the results and talk about that, and then talk about some of the jobs that are available that are out there to give you some idea of the scope. So the first research question had to do with the backgrounds and experience of people who are news product managers. And they are basically pretty well educated. Almost all of them had some sort of a degree. Half had an undergrad degree, and the other half went on to get some sort of a master's or graduate degree. Excuse me. They're very young, although they have a lot of experience. So of those indicating more than 10 years of experience, more than half were in the 35 to 44 age group. And of those indicating 7 to 10 years, more than 60% were in the 25 to, that's 34 age group. So they're young, but with a lot of experience. And they also mostly work for large legacy companies. So this really identifies an opportunity for smaller media organizations. Digital media organizations were often much smaller than 100 employees. And those without a print or broadcast component, like the Vox or BuzzFeeds of the world, they comprised about 16% of the sample. And so continuing with their backgrounds, there were just a lot of different roles. And I often tell my students to not look at titles when they're looking for jobs. I tell them to look at what the responsibilities are in the description and see if it mentions the things that they want to do, because many of these roles are defined with different terms, different phrases. product managers, product directors. There's a lot of people that are in editorial functions or audience functions or revenue functions. And there are even people who define themselves as journalists, technologists, or executives in these particular roles. Even some of the ones who define themselves as journalists indicated that they had been in their position only a short time, less than 5 years, and that their particular role didn't exist 5 years ago. And I think that indicates a lot of the people who've moved into data journalist roles consider themselves in this product management realm. And so overall, 88% had been in their current jobs for less than 5 years in total, and more than 2/3 said that their specific position did not exist 5 years ago. That indicates that this is a new group. There's not a lot of processes in place. There's no rule book for them to follow. And many of them were feeling that they did not have the career development that they needed because their role was so new. Take a little sip here. So the second research question had to do with the perceptions that product personnel have associated with their functions. So you'll see some interesting trends in their answers here. More than 80% agreed that they have the skills to do their job effectively. And more than 70% said they have access to tools to do their job effectively. So that's good. For preparedness, though, only 34% felt that their educational background prepared them for this role. To me, that's concerning, but not surprising, because a lot of journalism schools or media programs have not moved in this direction with their curriculum. And so that's why I feel like our curriculum is sort of on the cutting edge of that. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then my previous experience prepared me for my current role was 70%. So they felt like their experience was more important than their educational background. And again, really concerning to me. So the statement, journalism schools should include product management topics in curriculum, almost everybody agreed to that. 80%, 87% agreed to that. So I could not agree more. Some of the challenges that people felt is that they didn't have enough resources, not enough strategic direction, misalignment on goals, breakdown in communication between departments. Legacy media companies were more likely to mention breakdown in communication, which makes sense, then maybe they have more bureaucracy. And digital news organizations were more likely to mention having not enough resources, again, more of in a startup mode. And then here's some skills that they mentioned. And I think that, again, this is, in talking about the slide I showed before, when you look at front end or back end development being way down that list and really technology skills not being very prominent here, other than user experience design, that seemed to have gotten pushed up to the top. They're really more focused on product strategy, the ability to execute plans, and the ability to work with people. And you can see it's like a range of skills. It's not one skill that got all the respondents. And again, I'll provide you this presentation so that if you want to look at it in more detail later, you can do that. Let's see. So the last research question had to do with qualitative statements. I asked people, how do news product professionals describe their functions in relation to the boundaries established by traditional roles? In general, if they had to explain their job to a family member, how would they do that? And so you can see some of the phrasing that they used here. These are just examples. Sorry, my throat's getting dry. So they fell into different frames. Quite often, some of them use the bridge framing, where they talked about things specifically as being that bridge between those areas. Others talked about them as intersections, which is similar to a bridge. Others talked about working in many different kinds of functions. I work on the product side, I work on the editorial side, but some still kind of phrase what they did as support. And so they talk about helping journalists. And some still define themselves in opposition to content, like I do everything but the journalism part of it. So those are very interesting trends to look at, and just to assess, I think, over time in terms of how people who work in product roles feel about what it is that they do and how integrated it is with the rest of the organization. So this is the conclusions of the report. I have a few things after this, but you'll see that the function is filled with contradictions right now. There's a lot of females, but it's not very diverse otherwise. The people who are product managers are very well educated, yet they don't perceive their education as relevant to their current job. And I think that's very important. They are young and work in relatively new positions, but they mostly have years of experience. These are not entry-level people. And they don't feel like they have clearly defined career paths and support. And so I feel like we're on the precipice of a profound shift in the mission of journalism. And this all has to do with culture. It's from a culture of reporting and editing on limited platforms to one that's focused on building trust by representing communities and solving problems across products. That was, sort of the thesis statement I wanted people to get out of that particular research. So before we kind of go on to look at some of the jobs, are there any comments or questions at this point about the research?
Anybody?
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, Kapil.
Yeah. So, ma'am, we were talking about product management, and I saw the percentage, and there it's mentioned that like at the very end we can see investigation reporting, right? How much percentage organization are spending to investigation reporting. So that also affects the product. Like if the value will affect if then the product is not good, and like for a journalism product, the product is journalism. So if the journalism is not good, what can the product managers do?
I mean, I think that's part of their job, is to manage all the resources so that they have what they need to make a good product. And somebody has to do that. It may not be the journalists who are able to do that. It may be somebody that's in an editorial role that's leading the product to make sure that the proper resources are applied to it. If you look at like an investigative product like what ProPublica does, I don't know if you're familiar with ProPublica, but they have journalists that are doing reporting. They have people who need to work on the data to support the reporting. They have people who need to make the interfaces that allow users to be able to explore the data on their own. And without all those inputs, all the people on that team, they all need money and resources to be able to develop it, right? So it becomes a more complex financial environment as well as just a management environment. And that somebody has to be doing that. Somebody has to represent that interest, quite often without any real direct authority of the people they're managing. The web developers may report to a web development team or a tech team. The data journalist may report to a different editor than the investigative journalist, but a product manager has to assert authority through their influence and not through their direct reporting. And to be able to have the ability to do that and make all those pieces come together like a puzzle. And so their ability to execute that is directly related to how the organization feels about them, right? Their position in the organization is going to determine whether they get the resources they want and whether the people who are working with them actually can produce what they're going to produce. So I think having a product manager adds a critical aspect to understanding how much is needed and what all those resources are and how to best manage those resources. Because again, journalism is in financially dire straits. They're not flush with money. And so if they don't manage the resources and the funding of these projects, they may run out of funding. And so they have to be carefully managed. They have to be frugally managed, but appropriately managed. And again, so there needs to be somebody thinking about that. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, good. Anybody else? I can continue. If anybody has anything, we can come back.
You can continue, Cindy.
Okay. So I'm kind of kicking this around a model of connecting engagement, because there's a lot of research being done on engagement, and out now a little bit more being done on product. I want to connect product to engagement, and I feel like the aspects of a product, like its platform, the user experience that you might encounter, whether you're on Facebook or if you're on a platform for a news organization where you're just trying to comment, and then the data and the algorithms that give you access to the information, that drives engagement. And that's why engagement on, say, the Washington Post website is going to be very different than the engagement on the Washington Post TikTok. It's a different product, it's a different platform, it uses different data, and it has different analytics. It's different on Facebook, the Washington Post Facebook page, than it is for the TikTok. And so understanding how the different aspects of the product itself influence engagement, I think is going to be like a new direction in research. And I'm trying to get something together that will present this model in a journal at some point. And so some of the future issues that I see that need to be discussed in media scholarship, as well as in the professional organization, is this idea of the unique position of product in journalism. How having digital products is different for a media organization than it is in Facebook or Google or TikTok or Apple or any number of companies. But still a tech company that makes digital products, they're just very specific to journalism. Understanding the product roles in other industries, because we know that all our students don't get jobs in journalism, but they could be really great product managers in a bunch of different companies. The skills and competencies needed to develop a product culture. And I think that's really the phrase we need to be using, because it is a change in culture of these organizations. It is upending the parts of the organization that had power in the past and replacing them with people that used to be on the sidelines. And so, seeing how well an organization kind of moves into a product culture will be interesting over the next 10 to 15 years. I mentioned before ethics. These products need to have ethics and journalistic sensibilities built into them, or you're going to have a Facebook that just publishes anything without any consideration of misinformation or how these will be used and shared amongst others in the community. So, these responsibilities are still there even as we're making digital products. And Facebook is full of smart people. Like, they know that their products are being used to spread misinformation. They now know that their products harm young women in terms of how they feel about themselves, their confidence and body image. They know these things. Are they doing something about it? That's the ethical part of it. And then, what are the other tensions introduced in a product-focused organization? What is it that is happening, in terms of power in these organizations when decisions have to be made? Who gets to make them, and who holds the power and influence, and how do these roles feel about their influence? And then finally, and most important to me, is how should these concepts and approaches be addressed in media education? So these are just food for thought for you as you start thinking about projects or moving into professional roles. And this is our degree in digital media innovation. We started it 5 years ago. STEM, you probably know that stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. This is a STEM-based degree. It's designated as a STEM program, but in a School of Journalism and Mass Communication. And students take classes in web development and design. They work with data, they work with analytics, they do strategy, they work on these innovation topics. And they graduate with this broad set of skills that are skills presented in a communication context. We need very innovative faculty to be able to do this. And and so that is just important. And without the faculty who understand this environment and understand all those phrases that I mentioned before, it's very difficult to make much progress. Here are some of the jobs in the LinkedIn Emerging Jobs Report for 2021. And so you'll see some of the things that I think are important. Digital marketing, front end, back end, and full stack developers, digital content creators. I mean, everyone in a media organization is now a digital content creator. And then user experience professionals, really people who are focused on the user experience. And I think we all learned that we all need to become remote workers over the past year and a half. And so remote work is going to continue, and having people who are comfortable working remotely, organizations understanding that they can hire people remotely and maybe get better employees, more profitable ways to get resources, and students having to understand that they may have to do their interviews completely remotely. I had students get, and you're probably familiar with this, but students who got jobs in 2020 and 2021 did all their interviews online, started their jobs never having gone to a workplace. Maybe in some cases they drove up and picked up a computer and went home and got to work. That was very unusual for employees, especially entry-level employees in the US. And so now we've all had to get used to this. We've all, teachers and students working in a remote environment. The good thing about the past year is that now everybody knows how to do this and can practice it in a work environment. So there are a lot of jobs in product management, some that actually call things product manager jobs. And you've probably seen a lot of these posted, and I will give you access to this because I don't want to go through every single one of these, but this is a product manager job at the New York Times for engagement, talking about building products and developing new storytelling formats. So it's still very coupled with storytelling. And it talks about looking at audience needs and looking at analytics and working with data, analyzing performance metrics. So that's one. I have two students who work now for Gannett, which is a large media conglomerate that owns the USA Today, as well as many, many newspapers across the US. And they merged with Gatehouse Media last year. So I have two students now who work as front-end engineers for Gannett, and they work in this environment where they work on products. They work closely with the product and UX team, and they make, prototypes for these products, varying products all throughout the organization. So they work to build solutions on an innovation team. This is the perfect kind of job that we want to see our students get, because we still have a journalism degree. And so that degree should be creating the editors and reporters of the future. This degree, the digital media innovation degree, is really creating the everything else, all the things that need to be in place to be able to create the products that the journalism sits on. And so, just recently, these were all jobs that were available online. All of them, either mentioning product or being very related to product or user experience across some of the larger media companies, as well as some of the digital only, some of the more local companies, and some of the conglomerates. So this isn't just like one or two jobs. Every organization has these opportunities. And as I mentioned before, it's broader than journalism. All businesses are developing digital media products, particularly in the US since the pandemic. Every grocery store had to have a way to order curbside. Every restaurant needed an online way to order and maybe do delivery of food. Everybody had to move in that direction. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to move into this area. And this book, Ask Your Developer, I saw him speak at online South by Southwest this year. And one of his phrases was, it's no longer build or buy. When you make a technology decision, should I build it or should I buy it? He's saying the decision now is build or die, that your company really needs to have the resources internally to build your own products. And even if you buy them, you have to be able to customize them. You can't just take something off the shelf and apply it to your customers, audiences, and experiences and products. So I agree with that. And then here I have a student who works as a product manager at HEB, which is our grocery store, big Texas grocery store. You may not have heard of it, but very popular grocery store in Texas. And they're working on prototypes, user testing But if you look at the very last thing that I have highlighted at the end of this, it still says be an exceptional communicator. And so that's why I feel like coming out of a communication program is a perfect place for somebody, as long as they get introduced to these technology and business skills, they become a leader, they still have to be an exceptional communicator. And these skills are not really being taught in other parts of the university. This is not a focus in computer science, or not necessarily in the same way in a business school. So a unique opportunity, I think, for journalism curriculum. And then here's just a list of some of the alumni. Some of them are from our undergraduate DMI program. Some of them are graduate students that were focused on digital media over the past several years. They work, places like Texas Tribune. They work as web developers. One of them is the managing editor, senior producer for a news startup called Estonia.com. She literally graduated a year ago, and she's running this news startup. Started out as an engagement producer, and they quickly were like, hey, would you like to run the whole thing? And so some of the jobs are in journalism, you'll see, and then some of them are communication and technology jobs that go outside of journalism. I have a student who's a web developer at Petco, which is a pet food and services and resources retailer. I have a student who works for something called Ojo Labs, and they are an AI-based real estate company, and they're a startup in Austin. And so, we have people who are doing a range of things, but all sort of in this digital product support environment. And then I think I'm getting to the end of what I had to formally present here, but I created this program with the support of the Knight Foundation a few years ago, because, I realized that a lot of faculty were not of the understanding of these concepts. And as I mentioned before, if they didn't have this approach, if they didn't have this insight, if they didn't even have the language to talk about this, then how would we even expect curriculum to ever be modified? So for 3 years, I had 20 faculty. They were either PhD students or early career faculty. And the goal was to introduce them to all these different topics so that when they got their jobs and they started working on faculties, on curriculum committees and personnel committees, that they'd actually be able to have an active role in shifting curriculum and making curriculum suggestions and changes. So the first 2 years was, they did 10 weeks online in the spring, and then they came to my campus for 1 week. The third year happened right as COVID was hitting, so that was completely online. And we will do at least one more completely online version with the funding we have left from Knight, and then we'll assess. But we've had about 60 people go through the program so far that were faculty members. And I'm always very happy when I see them talking about changes that they've made, new programs that they've implemented in their curriculum, new research that they've done in this area, and that they're spreading the word to their respective organizations. And so that's it. Yeah, I want to, talk to you about, where do you think you fit in a media product culture? I mean, as you leave this program and you seek employment, does this area interest you? And if it does, where do you fit in this sort of media product ecosystem? So let me stop the share and see if we can talk for a few minutes about this.
Yeah, guys, just go ahead, fire away.
May I?
How many? Go ahead.
Morning, ma'am. Ma'am, I was just wondering, like, when we were going through the whole presentation, and I just realized that there's a lot of techie stuff, and you said like there's job openings for full stack engineer and all, front stack and back stack. So it would require somebody with a mathematical background to do these things, right? We are taught the cutting edge technology in the college, but the way I saw it is like it would take at least 2 or more years to understand the whole thing. And
not necessarily. Our students in the digital media innovation degree, the first class that they're required to take with us is a web development class. And so they learn the basics of HTML and CSS and some of the more popular libraries and content management. And then there are electives that they can take that get them more involved into data and JavaScript and interactivity. everyone that comes out of those classes is probably not prepared for one of these roles, but for a percentage of them, it sparks an interest. They're like, this is my field, these are my people, this is where I want to go. And so they'll continue to do projects on their own, and they will try to find gateway roles, entry-level positions that will allow them to move into these roles. So that's for, like a front-end developer or something like that. And so I have conversations all the time with hiring managers about trying to create programs where you can identify really bright young people who have an interest in this and give them the support to help develop them to get what they maybe didn't get in their education. Same thing with product managers. Product managers are typically not an entry-level position. There's usually some sort of a gateway, like you're an engagement analyst, you are a systems analyst, you work with analytics or something, and then you move into a product manager role. But I've been talking to a lot of people who work in the industry, and they're trying to create entry-level roles like associate product manager roles who can work under a product manager and gain the skills. The key thing is that these organizations need these people, but they need people with a unique perspective, and just hiring somebody from a computer science program may not provide them the insight that they need to think about the ethics of these products and to understand the journalism and understand the audience. And so we're kind of in a unique place right now where every organization is trying to figure out the best way to get these people. The two people I said that are front-end developers for Gannett had exactly what I told you, that exposure from my program. And they were both exceptional students who did extra projects on their own. And when the opportunity came up, I had a relationship with the hiring manager. His name is Tony Elkins. He comes to me now when he has an opening, and I tell him, here's raw talent. Can you work with this? And he's hired two of my people. So I wouldn't necessarily feel like you're not qualified for something like this if you've only had a small amount of experience, because if you have the interest in it and the desire to learn more, there are organizations that are willing to invest in you. How many of you think you'd like to work in a product role in the future? You can raise the hand on your Zoom, or you can just raise your physical hand.
Yeah.
Anybody now that you've heard all this, feel like you'd like to be a product manager or work in a product capacity?
Yeah, Cindy, I keep getting these questions because I'm scared of math, numbers. So I keep telling you, I'm not a math person.
Let's talk about that. So I'm going to be brutally honest with you, all of you. That is not a luxury any longer of being a journalist, is that you don't like math, because you can't tell stories without having some understanding of the data. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a mathematician, but you probably need to understand how a percentage works, and to be able to make comparisons, and then to be able to work with somebody to create a chart or a graph. Your stories will be so much better if you have a cursory understanding of numbers. And so I would say, put your fear of numbers aside and work on improving your understanding of numbers at this point, and it will make you a better journalist. But also, I do have to say, all the product managers that I talk to in this role that I'm describing, they're not super mathematicians. They may be working with engineers, so they have to understand the environment of the engineer, but they're not calculating things. They would want to help solve the problem, like get that resource to help solve the problem and stay focused on that problem. So I don't think we can boil it down to this is a numbers job. A product manager job is a communicator's job and a leadership job. And then these other jobs that I mentioned, user experience design and web developers, these are very front end oriented. They're very much about how you present the information to the public. And I think that's very much in our wheelhouse as media professionals. We want to present information. We are not talking about physics or space or creating rockets. We're talking about front end websites and mobile apps. And this is what we do, right? So I think you're moving into a world where this is part of the communication culture.
Ma'am, one last thing, ma'am. Could you just suggest any online resources where we could learn this, like where we could increase our skills?
Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so many, and I'm not sure what
Who's
you
your
have
favorite, ma'am?
access. I'm not sure what you have access to in India, but you know, we have General Assembly here, which is a boot camp type style. And so any kind of a boot camp, you know, there's Coursera. We have this one called, well, it's part of LinkedIn. It's called LinkedIn Learning. It used to be lynda.com. And they have thousands of courses that you could take. So, you know, I would say, plus YouTube. I mean, there's anything you want to learn, just go on YouTube and like Google it and you'll find like somebody to explain something. So the first thing you have to do is figure out what it is you want to learn and start somewhere. Like maybe you want to do a side project, a passion project, something for fun, like I did when I first started HTML. For fun, I created a site about the bands that I went to see and the music that I liked. So then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to learn a little HTML and CSS. You may grow into doing something with WordPress. You may be like, well, I really want to present data interactively. And so maybe you want to learn a little bit of JavaScript. I'm learning new things all the time. I mean, this isn't something that I learned in my PhD and now I teach it. These are new skills that I have to gain all the time and bring into our curriculum, quite often train other faculty and prepare resources for them. So it just depends on what you want to learn and getting started and what you have access to. Does your university give access to any of these, you know, programs, courses that have technology focus?
Our program is very technology focused, but unfortunately, it's a 10-month program. And it's very, very hectic, Cindy. So they don't get a lot of time to explore other things. But
well, sure. And the same thing, but I mean, it really just depends on how you prioritize this as something you want to learn in your spare time or not, right? And reaching out for those resources that are outside. So like I said, the LinkedIn Learning that we have in the US, which I'm assuming you all have access to, it's in English. I think most of the tutorials are in English. Texas State allows students to take those for free. But if you're not a student that has that opportunity with their university, it's something like $30 or $40 a month. I can't remember. So you could sign up for it for a month and take a bunch of classes. But like I said, there's others that are free. Google just did this product management certification that I did that had Aaron Pilhofer and Kim Fox and some other people that I know. So just look around. There are tons of places that you can learn and just read some books. There's various, I don't have a list of the books right now, but I can try to pull some of those together. There's like a whole series of books that different people have written about dealing with products. I can find those because I have them as a list for my DMI class. But I mean, you know, really, do any of you think that you might want to work in a product capacity?
Yeah,
what kind of jobs do you all think you're going to do?
Yeah, actually, you know, since your last session, the lecture for the last batch, and that inspired so much, and 6 people are in the product development now. Straight off after my last batch.
6 people are in it right now.
6 people are already in that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I love to hear that. So who do they work
inspiring, for? Very, very inspiring.
That makes me happy. Well, who do they work for?
Quint, then one is actually like the prime thing for a contenist, which is pretty big.
I mean, you can see that there are just tons of opportunities and it's completely related to what you're interested in. It's just broadening your skill set.
And like you said, you know, because your journalism skills, you know, they're going to be a value addition to the other thing, because you hire somebody an MBA background, that person doesn't know storytelling. And whereas if you know storytelling and if you get into marketing, content development, and with this product management, only, you know, look at, you know, Serial is a great example of a product, right? The Serial.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
so that your journalism will, because a lot of them are actually scared. What am I doing here? Then? Why should I learn journalism? Should I go for an MBA? That's not the point here. We are trying to make. It's your journalism skill is a value addition. No MBA person can do that like we do in a newsroom.
Absolutely. I have to say, I mean, I have an MBA. It was from well before, that's why I worked in business for all those years. My understanding is that most MBA programs still teach business like it's the 80s. Like they have not even made the switch to fully understanding the digital environment, fully understanding product and digital concepts, fully understanding social media and engagement. So I don't think that people coming out of MBA programs are going to have any better perspective on this environment than people from a communication program, particularly if they're being focused in this direction. I certainly don't think people coming out of a computer science degree would be able to move into these leadership, strategy, collaboration roles that we're talking about in a media environment as well.
To add on to that, this city, just my experience as an educator is just I found I find it easier to teach engineers storytelling than to teach technology to journalists.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I've been teaching technology to a lot of people who didn't think they could be technologists for a very long time.
And it's working,
And it is working to some extent. I will say that there are some people who they don't want to take to technology, but where we are right now, as I just mentioned, is that we're creating interfaces. We're not, like I said, we're not building rockets. We are creating ways to share content and ways to make it visually interesting, ways to make it interactive, right? So that's relevant to communicators. And so I think if you position it in that sort of relevance, context and support, right? A computer science program might have a large lecture and they're teaching people how to code and there's no support. We teach things in small labs, give people the confidence that they can solve these problems and they can make these cool things. And before you know it, all these journalists are technologists. So I think that there are ways, and I'm particularly interested in this from a gender and diversity standpoint, that we introduce different kinds of people to technology so that we have more people who can help solve technology problems.
Anybody else?
Ma'am, just last thing, ma'am. Is it possible for you to share the course framework with us? Like what you teach in your college, you might be having a like this is how you have divided your course and like.
So are you asking what do you want me to share?
How is your course structured and what are the things you teach? Like you would be having a syllabus, right? A detailed syllabus, like this semester this is what you teach them and all those
the course structure, Karthik?
Yes, sir. Yes,
let me show. I'm going to share one more second here. So here's this site that you can go to right now. Not this. So let me get to the browser. It's called codeactually.com. I made this when I was a night fellow at Stanford. And here under the basics, I have HTML, CSS, responsive design, and HTML forms. And then under JavaScript and jQuery, a bunch of stuff about interactive JavaScript. And each one, and I use these in my classes. So this isn't completely what I cover in my classes, but there are videos, you can hear me talk. There are code samples here that you can copy and paste into your own files, and they should work. And then it, will kind of get you started, and you'll see there what I cover in those intro classes. I can also send you a link to the curriculum, because beyond the classes that I teach in web design, we also have a advanced social media and analytics class, and we have the digital media innovation class, which really goes over these product concepts.
Great.
So codeactually.com, you can take a look at that right now, and then I'll send some other things about our curriculum.
Anybody else?
I really hope you all will consider this direction for your career. One, because there are jobs. Two, because we need young, bright, innovative people moving into product management in media organizations. Not, I mean, obviously you could go work as a product manager at Google or Apple or something like that and make a ton of money, but we need young, bright, innovative people who will support products, come up with new ideas, support audiences in a journalism environment. And I think you'll find when you start looking at positions that there are lots and lots of jobs, whether they say product in them or not, there are tons of jobs out there that are looking for the skills that we've talked about today.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Cindy, for taking time for us so early in the morning.
Sure thing.
And,
I enjoyed it.
We'll keep coming back to you. Some of them will definitely keep coming back to you. And,
well, I love having this global connection, and I definitely look forward to staying in touch.
sure. Thank you so much for that.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Have a
Thank you,
nice
ma'am.
day.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.